Knows home improvement. Valid through 614 while supplies last. Selection varies by location.
Do you find yourself stuck in a timeshare? Get the real facts about the timeshare industry and your options for cancellation. Chuck McDowell, founder of Wesley Financial Group, has put together a free information guide that reveals the secrets the timeshare industry doesn't want you to know, including the 5 ways to get rid of your timeshare. Call now and get this timeshare cancellation guide absolutely free.
Call 800-462-3333. 800-462-3333. 800-462-3333.
Jacob Albracht, Tommy Castor. This is Sports Daily on Wichita's #1 sports radio, 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
All right, welcome in, everybody. It's Sports Daily. Jacob Albracht, Tommy Castor, back with you on this Tuesday. The Denver Nuggets are champions, as you heard from Ted the Sports Head there in the update coming in. Glad to be here with you. History made for the Nuggets, a finals where they really were the best team all the way through in the postseason. Nice job there. Christian Braun, the KU Jayhawk, gets a title. Things looking up for Christian Braun right now. They do a good job, the Nuggets, and we'll talk about it. They get the title. Jokic is the best and, maybe the best player in the world. What does that mean? Big picture. We'll get into all of it. And in the NBA, some other news for a team and a player that did not play in the finals. Fred VanVleet, big news yesterday. We'll get into that as well. We'll talk more about this conference realignment in the Big 12. So much more going on in the sports world. Tommy, how are you this morning?
I'm good. Looking forward to talking about the Denver Nuggets. That was a good series for the Nuggets for sure. I mean, I think silencing the naysayers saying that they'll never win a championship. And so looking forward to talking about that today.
And congratulations, by the way, to all of those fans of a team that hasn't won it yet. It's the best. If you're a fan of one of those teams, and can appreciate how good that feels. I'm a Rangers fan. We've been so close a couple of times, never been over the edge. And, for Royals fans, I think a lot of younger fans felt that way before they knocked off the Mets to get their World Series. It's a great feeling, and you feel good for those fans, and we're happy for Denver fans. There's a lot of Nuggets fans here, too, just Denver and Oklahoma City, the two closest teams to us here, and the Mavericks, I suppose. But, it's got some regional ties to us here. But that's out there. 869-1240 is the number on the IHOP hotline. Max Power in for Jad today. He'll take your calls. We've got you here on KFH. We've also got you on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter for our video stream. So feel free to join in and chime in those ways as well. Salvi trade rumors also to talk about today, which I've been sort of dreading that potential topic as it's potentially coming up this week, but it's out there. So we'll talk about that a little bit as the Royals continue to struggle and what that might mean as one of the favorite players. But let's start with the Nuggets, Tommy. And, they were clearly the better team. I do think that Miami deserves some credit here in just keeping that competitive, because last night it was, certainly not neat. It was kind of an ugly game a little bit. Jokic was great, right? Which doesn't surprise anybody. Jokic is always great. They were so clearly, I think, the best team in the postseason. It makes me wonder about, big picture. And is this the kind of team that can go on a little run? They certainly have a lot of talent. I think it probably matters more what the rest of the league does, but they get it done. And, Malone's never going to get the credit he deserves for this because it's all about Jokic, and that's fine. But and they did a good job on Jimmy Butler in that series. And I thought that was as important as anything that happened. Butler, by his own standard, Tommy, scoring, just strictly scoring, 13, 21, 28, 25, 21. I think if you tell people that before the series, heading into it, most people probably take that 10 times out of 10 defensively against Jimmy Butler. When he's got to be the guy. He was good. He was okay, but he wasn't Jimmy Buckets, right? Where he just shoulders it up and gets it up. I thought Denver did a good job with that. And they're a better team. They're more talented. We knew that coming in. They played it out. They stumbled one time, Miami kept it competitive, but it wasn't a particularly close series. And Denver's your champion, as we thought that they probably would be for a while now.
Well, I think that Denver is just an incredibly balanced team. You and I have discussed it before, how they just kind of handle their business, right? Like there's not a whole lot of flash. There's not a whole lot of swagger. They just go out and they do what they need to do. I mean, look at Jokic, and he's a funny personality anyway, in that understated way. Celebrating in only the way that Nikola Jokic can, where it's kind of like, no big deal. We won the championship. Time to go home now. It's kind of that's kind of the mentality of this team, right? Like they put their head down. They go out, they eliminate the noise around them, and they go out and they handle their business night in and night out. They've done that all season long in an NBA nationally where people are never going to pay attention to them. They're always going to pay attention to the Lakers and to the Warriors in the West, right? Like those two teams will always get the headlines. And then you've even got some other teams in that conference that will probably be a little bit more popular than they are. The Phoenix Suns come to mind. And, there are some other teams there that you just don't always think about the Nuggets. They just kind of go out there and handle things. That's what they did throughout the playoffs. I was especially impressed by them in this finals when they stumbled in game 2, because the effort level was really, really poor in game 2. And it was so unlike what we've seen from Denver, not only in the playoffs, but during the entire season. Like you typically don't see the effort level being low for the Denver Nuggets. And there was, I think, some real concern there. Like, okay, like, did we see a little bit of, an issue here? Like, is there kryptonite for what the Nuggets, are typically able to do? And Michael Malone, to his credit, got that team re-energized, got the effort level up. And, game 3, they basically showed you why they're the best team in the NBA. And then they put their foot on the gas and went from there. So, I like that about them, where you saw not a good effort in game 2. They could have easily hung their heads and, let Miami right back in the series. They didn't do that. And so they flexed a little bit in games 3, 4, and 5. And here we are. The Nuggets are champions.
Yeah, they're champions, and I do think they have a chance to get on a run. They're on a run sort of anyway, right? Like they've been on a run. They've just been very unlucky until this year. Key players hurt. All kinds of different things have seemed to snakebite them a little bit, and they were able to take the step. And I think because in the NBA, I think more than any other sport, we look at things like that. Like, are we on a potential dynasty? And we may not be. This may be the only one they ever get, which is also, celebrate it, enjoy it, Nuggets fans. You just never know. But I think they're set up to be able to make a run. I like their roster. Now their cap situation's probably a little difficult, so they'll have to navigate that, just like every great team does. But when you see young players like Christian Brown step up and have such an impact in the postseason, especially in the finals like you did, that gives you a little more hope. And it probably has more to do with what the rest of the league does too, right? And, who gets better. And we'll get into that with Fred VanVleet in a little bit later. But I think that, and for me, it all comes back to Jokic. I talked about this yesterday. Like the storyline becomes Jokic, because I think there's a chance we're watching somebody who could get into that GOAT conversation. Now, he's not there yet, obviously. And when we talk about that, you're basically talking about what? Of the modern era, right? I'm only going to speak to the modern era, not go back further than I was able to watch. But of the modern era, you pretty much have Jordan and LeBron at this point. Can Jokic get into that category? I think he probably can, because who are the next guys in that conversation? Steph Curry's not going to get there, as great as he is.
Kevin Durant probably is in that conversation.
Probably Durant is the next guy, but Durant's not going to get there either.
If you're going back in time and including Jordan, I mean, Kobe's going to be in that conversation.
Kobe's in there. Yep. But I'm not going to put Kobe with Jordan and LeBron, but he's in there. He's either 3. Sure. He's probably either 3 or Durant is. And like GOAT is all about winning, longevity, right? All of those things. Like, do you do those Herculean things like we've seen those players do? I think Tim Duncan's got to be in that mix, but he's a different kind of player, so he's never going to be there. But when you talk about winning, doing all of those things, and you've got to also be great statistically, there's not a lot of guys on that list. And I think Jokic, because I think he's 28. He can get there. He's not there yet. But the only thing he needs, right, Tommy, is championships, because statistically, if he's healthy and stays doing what he's been doing the last 3 or 4 years, statistically, he's going to be right there ahead of or with anybody. I mean, he set a record this year for leading the postseason in points, rebounds, and assists. What else can you do? I mean, defensively, I guess, is a consideration, and he probably will never be in the conversation with Jordan, LeBron, or Kobe in that area. But that's not everything, right? And so I think if he wins probably 2 more titles, I don't think 1 more will get it done, but 2 more could. I just think we're watching that, and I want us to appreciate it appropriately, because I don't think we have up to this point. Like, I don't think we have appreciated over the last 2 years, 2 years he won the MVP into now. I don't think we have appreciated him appropriately. I haven't. I mean, I'm speaking for myself here, and I think the larger basketball community, I don't think people have appreciated him appropriately.
I think that there's going to be a challenge when the dust settles and Jokic is done, and you look back on his career, 10 years from now, 15 years from now, whatever that is. I think there's going to be a challenge in, regardless of what the statistical categories say, of recognizing him in the same category as the GOATs. And I think some of that has to do with just the style of play. Like, you watch him and he's putting up these incredible numbers unlike we've ever seen before, right? And it's incredible statistically, but let's face it, it's not a thing of beauty. Like, it's not a thing of beauty to really watch him, right?
That's the problem. It's different than what we're accustomed to, so we don't appreciate it the way that we should. But
and I know that you specifically have drawn comparisons, and I think it's fair. I see it to an extent between Jokic and Dirk Nowitzki, but even with Dirk, I think his gameplay was a little bit prettier than what Jokic does, right?
His
like
fadeaway was pretty. His fadeaway was pretty, but he was also kind of tall and lanky and looked a little bit clumsy, even though he was not. And the comparison for me between those two is more about how they're perceived, not about the style of play, obviously, because it's very, very different. But the way that they're perceived, and because it looks a little bit different, and I do think there's like a goofy feel to Jokic and Dirk, because they're not these, chiseled Adonises out there like Giannis is or LeBron is. Like, they're not these pro wrestler body, like just these physical specimens. They just don't look like it, right? Like we're used to in the NBA. And so sometimes I think it's a little like it fools us a little bit.
Or you look at, like, you go back in time and look at Jordan, who defied gravity, it seemed like that's not Nikola Jokic.
It's not a part of Jokic's
at all.
Game.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is the bottom line. And statistically, it's there. It doesn't matter how you do it, right? Like, it's irrelevant. Steph Curry changed the game, did it in a different way than we ever saw before. And his impact on the game, I may say this all the time about Steph. Like, I don't know that there outside of Jordan will ever be a player that changes the game as much as Steph did. I mean, look at the way guys play now. Look at the way the game's coached, the emphasis on the three-pointer, all of these things. Man, that's all Steph. So I don't think Jokic is going to be able to do that, because he's unique in his size, right? Like, he's just not everybody's as tall as he is. But yeah, it does look a little bit different, but that's okay. And I think this now gets the conversation going in that direction, because despite the 2 MVPs, despite all the stats, all of that stuff, I don't think it was there yet. And I think you're what you'll hear today and what we've heard through the finals is Jokic the best player in the NBA right now? And I think that this answers that question as emphatically yes. In an era of great players, like in an era of depth in the league of great players, and it sort of has rotated. We're on a 3-year stretch here where Jokic is pretty clearly the best player. And now with a title, I think he can easily make that case. But what I think we'll see the conversation shift to is, where does he stack up all time? Now, he's going to need more titles to do it. He's going to need probably at least 2 more. And then I think you can begin to have that conversation realistically, because I'm not trying to say he is right now. I'm saying he's the best player right now, and he's this unique thing that we're watching. But I do think that possibility exists that he becomes in that conversation if he can win at that level, because statistically he's going to be there. I think, unless something catastrophic happens, he'll be there statistically doing things we've never seen before. His best seasons, Tommy, are better, offensively, when you're talking just about points, rebounds, and assists, than anybody we've ever seen in the modern era. Like, he's already been better than that because he, passes and rebounds at such a high level, together. LeBron's the next closest, but I don't know. I think we're on that trajectory, and I think the Nuggets are good enough to help him get there. That's the other part of it, is can the Nuggets sustain this? I think that they can, because they've been in this position for a long time. Again, they've just been really unlucky. I think they'll be in the mix at least the next 3 or 4 years, if not more. They may have to reinvent themselves a little bit, but that's okay. And they're going to have Malone and Jokic now, you would think, although Milwaukee had Giannis and Budenholzer, and that's already broken up. So you think this is sustainable, but we'll see. I think it is, and I love it because I think it makes the NBA more interesting when you have those conversations.
Yeah, and I think that what makes this title more impressive to me for the Nuggets is, you and I talked about it before, the amount of pressure that I think was on the shoulders of the organization. Because if they didn't get it done this season with Jokic, they weren't going to get it done at all, in my opinion. Like, with the team that was surrounding Jokic, with the head coach there, if they couldn't get a title with that roster, then if I'm Nikola Jokic, I'm thinking, I got to go somewhere else if I want to get a title, because everything was, I think, in place and laid out almost on a silver platter for the Nuggets to get a championship. And like you had mentioned, they had been unlucky in years past with injuries and, whatever. That was off the table this year. Like, that, none of that was there. They lost 7 times at home the entire season. They were pretty clearly the best team in the NBA for basically the entire season. So everything else, anything you could chalk up as an excuse for them to not get a title in years past, that was gone this season. And so the fact that they were able to overcome that amount of pressure to win a title for Nikola Jokic and to keep this team together, that's what makes it impressive towards me. And, I mentioned it before the series even started that I felt like, even though Denver was a better team, Miami was going to be intriguing because they were playing with house money, and they had been for so long, and all the pressure was on the shoulders of the Nuggets, and Denver was able to actually block all that out and get the championship. And so I think that layer of it makes it that much more impressive for me.
Agree. And the other part of that is too, like, they were such heavy favorites going into the finals, facing an 8 seed, right? That would have also not been forgivable,
right?
Regardless of what happened. So they're there.
Regardless of what
Christian
we've seen
Brown
from Miami throughout the entire playoffs,
doesn't matter.
At the end of the day, they were still an 8 seed.
Yep. And clearly less talented, right? Without their second best player, arguably, in Tyler Hero. So, yeah, there was going to be no excuse on the table. And it doesn't matter. Denver got it done. Denver did exactly what it needed to do. And, congratulations again to all the Nuggets fans. Congratulations to Christian Brown, the Kansas native, the Kansas Jayhawk. I know Bill Self was there. He tweeted. That's a lot of fun, too. Very interested to see his career. Another guy we're interested to watch the career of, Fred VanVleet. Massive news yesterday. That's where we'll head next. Sports Daily rolling through. IHOP hotline open for you, 869-1240. You think Jokic can get to that GOAT conversation? Let us know. You can also leave us your comments on our video stream. We're just getting warmed up on a Tuesday here on Sports Daily. It's Albracht and Castor. We'll be right back.
My hands on myself. Pick out dust them off, put them back up on the shelf. Kiss my little baby girl isn't me. Am I coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kickstart. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might be over and now, but I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kickstart. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Nothing over now, but I feel it still. not another mouth to feed. Even with the babysitter, mama call a grave digger. Gone with the fallen leaves. Am I coming out of left field? Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might have had your fill, but I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over tonight, I feel it still. We can fight a war for peace. Giving to that easy living, goodbye to my hopes and dreams. Stop flipping for my enemies. We'll pick up wait until the walls come down. It's gonna give a little to the kids in the middle. Oh, till it falls, won't bother me. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks. Yeah, your lover's in a bitch for my heart to eclipse now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. I've been feeling it since 1966 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Ooh, I'm a rebel just for kicks now. Let me kick it like it's 1986 now. Might be over now, but I feel it still. Might have had your fill, but I feel it still.
Oh, okay, take it easy. We're going on the air.
This is Sports Daily on KFH.
National championship for Kansas, NBA championship for the Nuggets, back-to-back years. Feels pretty good to be Christian Brown today. He's being celebrated. Man, the country fell in love with him, Tommy. He's like become this darling here, which is it's really, really interesting to see him do sort of the same thing, right, that he did at Kansas. And just imagine back to like the early Kansas career of Christian Braun. I don't know that very many people envisioned this, but it's really cool to see. Fred VanVleet, on the other hand, and we make the transition here on Sports Daily, he kind of did you would expect big things from coming out of college basically right away. And he was such a force in college basketball and the attitude and all that. And those are, by the way, some of the same things that make Christian Braun great. Attitude, right? And Fred VanVleet yesterday, the big news from Woj at ESPN that VanVleet is declining his player option for the final year in Toronto, basically walking away from $23 million to become a free agent. And he'll earn more than that, Tommy. There are rumors he could become a max player. The possibilities are endless on where he ends up back in Toronto, to a team that has a lot of money to spend, or maybe to a team that wants to do a sign and trade, give Toronto some picks and make money that way. Fred VanVleet will be one of the biggest names out there this year in free agency. The timing for him this year is fantastic because he is the guy. He is the guy this year.
Yeah, and I would be absolutely shocked if he ends up going back to Toronto. I just don't see that happening. And the reason for that, I mean, I think that also, he can make a lot of money elsewhere. But remember, Nick Nurse is not there anymore. Adrian Griffin is not there anymore. There's big time turnover with the Raptors. And so it wouldn't surprise me one bit if he ends up going somewhere else.
Well, doesn't it seem like a sign and trade too? Because they can give him a ton of money and then he can end up wherever because it can come as a sign and trade. If I understand this correctly, he can make the most money in Toronto. So if he signed there, then could be traded. That does make some sense. And I think allows a little more wiggle room to end up with a big time contender. And so, Chicago, I think, will always be in play for Fred VanVleet. He's from that area, loves that area. And you could have it in mind. I would imagine that he will put some emphasis on winning championships. But I don't know that, right? Like, he's got a chance to do a lot of things. He's got a chance to go be somebody's star. He's got a chance to join a group and solidify a title contender. I mean, the possibilities are sort of endless in this free agency, but, he'll get paid. And I don't think you walk away unless you're going to get paid. And that's why he's doing this. So where is that done? Again, I'd say watch Chicago. And then sort of all bets are off on the sign and trade. It gets complicated in the NBA. I do think there's a chance he returns to Toronto. I mean, I think there's a chance that he rides that out there and just uses this position that he's earned to make more money. Man, it's fascinating. It's what a career so far, and it's about to take the next step.
And I just wonder, with whatever team he goes to, assuming he doesn't go back to Toronto, if he signs with another team or if there's a sign and trade, is Fred VanVleet the caliber of player that turns whatever team he goes to into an instant NBA title contender? I think he certainly has the skill set to improve a team for sure, right? I mean, like, that's for sure going to happen. I don't know. I think that's an interesting conversation. Is he the caliber of player that teams would look at saying, we have to get VanVleet on our roster because that will get us over the hump to win an NBA title?
To get over the hump, absolutely. Yes, I think he is. I think he can be the final piece of a team that puts them, in the mix. I mean, 19-7 this past season, 7 assists. I mean, he's been really, really good over his career now. And I just, you get into those conversations with what does that play as, but we've seen him be capable of being the guy in individual games. And I think that matters. If you know anything about Fred VanVleet, and it's funny to even see, in conversations like Woj yesterday when talking about this, he's a known winner. He brings winning to the table. I can't remember how he phrased it, but it's absolutely what it is, right? Like, Fred's not, what did we just talk about? Like, that killer instinct that went, like, that's what he does better than anything. It's what he's always done better than anything. And statistically now over his NBA career, he's basically scored 20 points a game for 3 straight years. He was an all-star last year. His assists are he's basically a 20-7 guy consistently now we'll call it between 18 and 20 and around 7 for 4 years now. We got a proven commodity here. Every team would love to have that. He is a more than capable 3-point shooter. He's a good defensive player. And so, yeah, I think he absolutely puts somebody over the hump. Now, can he go somewhere and become like this star individual? I don't know, but I don't know how much that's appealing anyway. Like, I would hate to see Fred go do that. I'd rather see him go somewhere where he compete for titles. So, and there's a lot of teams, by the way, where you can do that, where his skill set does put you over the hump for sure. I mean, imagine Miami. There's a team right there. Look at Miami this year. There's 1,000. Look at the Clippers. You could reunite with Kawhi Leonard, perhaps. The Lakers. My goodness. Like, there are a lot of places Fred can land, get paid, and try to win titles. And I hope that's where he ends up. Chicago makes sense geographically. Chicago's an up-and-coming team that, they think Lonzo Ball is going to be out forever now with an injury. They could really use the hometown return of Fred VanVleet.
Is there a fit maybe in Phoenix if they get rid of Chris Paul, like, the rumors are?
Sure there is. I just don't know.
I mean, think about him with Devin Booker together.
I know. I'm not smart enough financially to know how that all works. So I don't know how to answer that. I don't know on the sign and trade. I know like it's harder in the NBA, I feel like, even than it is in the NFL to understand this cap stuff. And so I don't know that part of it, but all I hope for Fred is, because I think he's going to get a max or close to it. I just hope he ends up with a contender, because
man, I just had a thought. For God's sakes, team him up with Luka in Dallas. That'd be a ton of fun.
Yeah, but Luka's a point, so I don't know how that would fit. Because Brunson, we were kicking around the office yesterday, and we were like, who's the point in New York? And somebody said Jalen Brunson. I'm like, Jalen Brunson? He wasn't the point in Dallas. Luka was. So I don't know. Yeah, that would be cool, but it would be cool just because I like the Mavericks. But Oklahoma City, up and coming team. Could you make a case to put Fred on that young roster to infuse just that, winning attitude with a bunch of young players? Yeah, I think you could. And I think that kind of thing makes sense for Fred too. It's just like, go back, undrafted, all the chatter, like bet on yourself, all of it. He's likely going to turn into a max player in the NBA. That is crazy. I think even the most optimistic people, when thinking about Fred as a pro, would not have thought of him as a max player. I mean, you'd have to really look around the NBA, because I would have to talk to like an historian about this, but has there been a more decorated and like from undrafted to this story in the NBA? Like, I don't know.
I don't think so. I don't think so.
I can Google a best undrafted players list, and we'll just take a look here.
I mean, I don't think that there is.
Here's what Sporting News says, which we pull up off the top here. He's probably going to top this list. They have him actually as number 6, and I don't know how old this list is. But Udonis Haslem is 5. I'll take Fred over Haslem. Bruce Bowen, that's a good one. I'll probably take Fred over Bruce Bowen. His career average was 6 points a game. John Starks, give me Fred. Connie Hawkins is probably that's a good one, and Ben Wallace is a really good one too.
Yeah.
So yeah, you're getting in there with a conversation of like the best ever undrafted player for Fred. That's pretty wild. And he's about to become a max player, and if he gets into the right spot, have a chance to win some titles. And here's the coolest thing about all of it. He's already pledged to give a bunch of money back to Wichita State to help build a weight room. Like, he is a flag bearer for Shocker basketball, and perhaps the most important one they could have, because any player you're recruiting, and not that it will have anything to do now with the way Fred was brought up, because different coach, different everything, but still, you've got this guy who came to Wichita State, played a bunch of years, had opportunities to go other places, did not, would have been. Could you imagine Fred in the NIL space? I mean, he would have cashed in big time here, and came and became, the max player. That helps. That's going to help Paul Mills recruit players in. Like, there's no reason to go anywhere else. Why wouldn't you come here and be a star like Fred was. And remember Fred's numbers back in college. I mean, I don't think he ever scored more than about 13 points a game in college because nobody ever did on the Shockers. And here he is. And there's this track record. And, credit to Greg Marshall for finding these players. But when you talk about Fred and Ron Baker had a nice time in the NBA, and Landry Shamet and Austin Reeves and all these players that were recruited in there, like that becomes you put, and Austin Reeves is going to get paid too, by the way. He's not going to be a max player. I don't even know if he's eligible, but he's going to get paid when he gets a chance. But Fred's about to become a max guy. And those are all Shockers within the last 7 years.
Yeah. My favorite thing about Fred, thinking back to the draft, the year that he was in the draft class and didn't get drafted, I remember, and I might be completely forgetting the way that this whole thing played out, but I feel like I remember going through draft night and thinking, man, it's a tragedy he didn't get drafted. Like, I don't think that there was, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like that was something that everybody thought he should have been, right? It wasn't like he was completely off the radar, right?
He was fringy.
Yeah.
He's 6'1". I mean, that's it. He's 6'1". And there wasn't anybody on the planet, I don't think, that didn't love the kind of player he was.
Yeah.
He went through
the
that
energy,
process,
the tenacity,
and I
the
think
intensity, all of that.
Everything. If you ever heard him talk in college, it was like, you might have 10 years on him, but he seems like the elder statesman, right? You want to tell him yet, you know what I mean? But he was 6'1", and that matters in the NBA. How does a player like Steph Curry, not the number 1 overall pick, right? Size matters. And I think that held him back a little bit, but that honestly, it's probably the best thing that ever happened to Fred, because if there's ever been a chip on the shoulder, prove it player, I'm not taking anybody. Like, that's the kind of juice you get in Jordan and Kobe, like that, like watch me kind of attitude. And he is as loaded with that, always has been. Nobody wears a chip on their shoulder better than Fred VanVleet. And, being 6'1" in the NBA, as I sit here, whatever I am, 5'9", like I get it. Like I get being, when you're trying to do things competitively and size isn't at your advantage. He's had to overcome that, and he has, and it's less of a hindrance now in the NBA, I think, than it ever has been. I mean, size obviously still matters, but guys like Fred have a place now, and it's so awesome to see, and I love it, and I cannot wait to see where he ends up. I don't really have like a hope of where he ends up. I don't really care. I just want it to be somewhere that we're always still talking about Fred VanVleet, number 1, and number 2, that he has a chance to play in the postseason consistently, because I think that's where he'll shine. And, wherever that is, it's going to be cool. And maybe there's a pipe dream. Maybe he can end up closer to us here, and fans will have a chance to go see him a little more often than in Toronto, although I'd invite anybody to go up to Toronto. It's a pretty cool place. But Fred VanVleet is going to be a max player. Let that sink in. He opted out of $23 million. He said, no, thank you. That's just crazy to me.
Bet on yourself. That's what he does. It's what he's always done.
Right now.
So, as soon as that player option was on the table, I think, knowing him historically and the decisions he's made.
Well, he's,
I mean, come on, like it was a no brainer. He was going to decline that option and go bet on himself.
Savvy. He's so savvy that, you're walking away from 23, but you're at least going to make 10 more probably this year. And you're going to get a much bigger deal in totality because he knows he'll deliver on it. Right. And he probably safer to take a nice, healthy extension in Toronto or do whatever, but he's betting on himself for sure. And he's going to bet on himself to pick the right spot too. So Fred VanVleet, free agent, one we will watch very, very closely over the coming months. And as I understand it, July 1st is when we get official news, but we'll probably start to hear chatter pretty quick because he is. Go look at the free agent list. He's at the top. And so his courting will be very, very high profile and front and center. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back. We have this Salvi trade stuff. I don't know, man. I don't know how I feel about that. I still don't. And we'll get into that. We'll get into the Big 12 room. We just dabbled into the Big 12 latest rumors yesterday, so we'll dig into that a little deeper. Plenty more still to come. It's Albracht and Castor. It's Sports Daily. It's Tuesday. Coming right back. All right, welcome back in, everybody. It's Sports Daily here on KFH. Glad to be with you on the program today. It is Albracht. It is Castor back with you on a Tuesday. I've got you one more day this week before we hit the road again here. For me, it was, I go out to the West Coast to see my in-laws and family, and my mother-in-law wanted to take the kids to Disneyland, and it's one of those like, all right, guys, we're probably never doing this again. And so we went to Disneyland one day, and we went to California Adventures the next day. It's an experience. I went to Disneyland when I was like 4, and then haven't been back until now. And I don't remember a lot of it except being really scared on one of the rides at 4. But now it's more about, you realize how often you're going to stand in line. And I don't know how Disney's done it. But to take the amount of money they take from you on these experiences and have you stand in line for hours and hours and hours. I think we were there like 12 hours each day. And, in those 12 hours, we definitely spent, I don't know, 60% of it in a line, but probably closer to 80%. But they got a good thing going there at Disney. Hey, give us all your money and you can come in here and you can stand in our lines like that, because that's what you do more of than anything else. So we go to Disneyland the first day. It was cool. Some of the experience, like the new rides and stuff, are really cool. It takes a long time to get through them. You certainly can't ride everything. There's not enough time in the day, and there's just tons and tons of people. And then the next day we went to California Adventures, and California Adventures I thought was better. There were more like characters walking around and showy type stuff, and the rides were just as cool. And Tommy, the number one key, if you're going to stand in line for hours on end, you gotta have some beer or something to help you power through. And so they don't have that on the Disney side. They have it on the California Adventure side, though.
There you go.
And I think I text you this. Like, so this is day 2 now. So after one 12-hour day, and after the first, I don't know, leg of the second day, like my son turned 4. So he's right on the fringy nap, but they absolutely had to have naps here because they were just so drained from like all the senses. And so it's like, all right, you guys go ride some rides. I gotta get him to sleep. So we brought this massive stroller thing, and I was like, we'll put him in the stroller. I'll walk him around the park. And I'm like, I got it. I'll volunteer. Might seem like I'm being, taking one for the team there, but in reality, it's like, you guys stand in that line to go to that ride there. I'm going to take him for a walk. We'll get him to sleep. But the secret to that is, Tommy, you just make your way, you grab a beer. And now like this walk to get your son to nap becomes this walk around an amusement park with a beer. It became, that was one of my favorite parts about the day, was just like that zone out, take it all in, sip a beer moment while everyone else has to stand in another line for some other, ride or whatever. But yeah, California Adventures, if you want the hack there, like if you have to only pick one, that one has beer.
Yeah, I feel like you've kind of cracked the code a little bit. I'm a big proponent, and it doesn't matter if it's an amusement park or, I don't know, a shopping mall or anything that's public. In fact, I did this on social media a while back, a definitive ranking of like where guys can sit, like benches and rocking chairs and like things like that. Like I'm always on the lookout for where can I sit down, whether I'm shopping with my wife or going to an amusement park. So it sounds like you've cracked the code with not only a nice place to sit, but maybe even an adult beverage or two. So kudos to you. That's pretty fantastic.
So here's the thing. This is, and I probably am unique. I don't like sitting. That's the other thing. Like, that's the other reason I would volunteer to push the stroller around. And I've been this way. Like I don't go to the bar anymore because I'm too old and I have 3 kids and too many things to do. But like in those days, like I don't like to sit down. Like it to the point now where it's like, no, you guys can all sit. I'll stand next to you because it like makes me tired. It sort of drains the energy a little bit. So I actually like to stand up. Now I don't like standing in line. Let me clarify that
Give me a rocking chair all day.
No,
like I'm one of those old souls. Like I love Cracker Barrel because, man, I just want to sit in that rocking chair outside.
You love Cracker Barrel?
Of course. Who doesn't?
I don't hate Cracker Barrel, but I certainly don't love Cracker Barrel. I think it's a little boring and maybe a touch overrated. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. I like a lot of things about Cracker Barrel. Let me rephrase that. Like that vibe is cool. I like that. The breakfast is pretty good. It's pretty good. But I mean, I dated a girl one time that really liked Cracker Barrel, and all I could ever think every time was like, "You're the most boring person ever." Like, you want to go to Cracker Barrel? Okay. Like, we're at this point in life, like,
Was
20.
she 80? Oh, okay. So she was 20 and
Right.
she liked Cracker Barrel. Okay.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't know. Now it's like, okay, I can go with my kids, but then I got to walk through the gift shop and they're just going to bug me about buying stuff. And I don't want to buy anything. I just want to buy some eggs and bacon, I'm fine with Cracker Barrel. But in those, in those times, like, I want to move around. I want to do those things. So Disneyland is something. It is a lot of people. That doesn't bother me, but I know that bothers people. So if you don't like crowds and you don't like rubbing shoulders with strangers and, all the different smells that come with that, be careful. That doesn't bother me. It doesn't bother me at all. I don't care about that stuff. Doesn't, like, whatever. I can go stand in a crowd of people. But it was cool. The rides are cool. But be ready to stand in line. I don't know how you do it often. And I've heard Disney World is even worse.
Yeah, I've never done Disneyland. I've done Disney World a couple of times. And yeah, it's crazy busy. So I imagine that they're both probably about the same.
Our kids loved it. I'm very appreciative of the in-laws for taking us out there. Glad we got it in. My son wore his first day back to school today, had his Disney birthday shirt on, was excited to show that off and, let gloat a little bit, I think, whether he would admit it or not. But, I'll take it. But we're back here for another day, and then I got to take another trip. I'm going to be a zombie next week when we return for the full swing. Let's talk about this Salvi trade when we return on Sports Daily. I don't know, man. It's a rumor, and it might be even more than that. The more that comes out on this each hour, really, there's a chance Salvi may not be a Royal ever again after this year. That makes my heart hurt. We'll talk about it next on Sports Daily.
Laugh Out Loud Mornings with Bob and Tom on 97.5 and 1240 KFH, Wichita's most listened to sports radio. Always live on the free Odyssey app.
Don't forget Dad this Father's Day.
All right, everybody, welcome back in Sports Daily here on KFH. It's Albracht, it's Castor, it's a Tuesday. The Nuggets are NBA champions. Fred VanVleet's a free agent. We've been talking a lot of hoops in the first hour. We'll shift to a little baseball here to start the second hour. But first, we want to tell you about Free Music Friday from 8 to 10 o'clock at the Andover Central Park at the Capitol Federal Amphitheater. That's at 1607 East Central. They've got concerts in the park sponsored by IHOP. June 16th, Lou Brown Band. June 23rd, Across the Pond. June 30th, Annie Up. July 7th, Lucky People. 3 outdoor concerts. You can bring your lawn chairs, blankets, extra cash for those food trucks. Can't bring a cooler in. Gates will open at 6:30. Again, that's Friday nights in Andover. Concerts in the park sponsored by IHOP begins this Friday with the Lou Brown Band. Tommy, the Royals fall last night, and we sit here and we look, and the chatter now becomes around Salvador Perez. Royals are one of the worst teams in baseball. It's interesting that all the chatter has been about Oakland, who's gotten on a little win streak here, and now, as Oakland is this historically bad team, and they are, the Royals are only like a game and a half better. And so it's been ugly. It has stayed ugly. It hasn't gotten better. And now the difficult conversations are already starting. We know Aroldis Chapman's going to get traded. We assume Scott Barlow's going to get traded. Salvador Perez is interesting. Salvador Perez, apparently, a team has called about him. The Royals have confirmed that. Basically, the old, we're not looking to trade him, but, we'll listen to offers conversation, which means they're looking to trade him, in my opinion. The teams are going to ask about him, of course. Salvador Perez, to me, is going to be a Hall of Famer. He's just 33. As crazy as that seems, he's just 33. He's hitting 273 this year. He's got 13 bombs. He can still catch. He's got a bunch of gold gloves. It's been a while since he's been that, but he can be a DH, first baseman, and a catcher for somebody. Salvador Perez is interesting. He is in the Mount Rushmore of Royals baseball players, to me, number 2, right there with George Brett. If he finishes his career in Kansas City, he's got a chance to be number 1. He means everything to this organization, but man, they're terrible. And I don't know if you get a legitimate trade offer in your Piccolo, how you don't entertain that. So Salvador Perez, so this is the conversation happening. Salvador Perez then to Aaron Rodgers of MLB.com says, everybody knows that I love Kansas City and that I want to stay here for the rest of my career, but it's a business too. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know tomorrow I'm going to be here. I'm going to go play hard again. I will be as sad about Salvador Perez being traded, if he is, than any player for any team I've watched, covered, whatever, ever. And I loved Michael Young, and he was traded from the Rangers in a similar type situation. I will be devastated, and I'm not, a diehard Royals fan, and I love Salvador Perez, and he's the kind of player you want to see play in that one uniform forever. But if other teams are making crazy offers for him, like, what do? You gotta listen.
I'm going to go on the record right now and say that not only should the Royals entertain offers for Salvi, but I think the Royals ought to spearhead some talks to trade Salvi. And I hate that from an emotional point of view. I hate that because he is basically the only remaining player, like the only remaining part of those championship runs from Kansas City back in 2014 and 2015. And I think that this is less about Salvi and more of an indictment on the Royals front office for not surrounding him with the right people for success over the last 4 or 5 years. Because I think you're right. I think he's a Hall of Famer. I think that he is an incredible player. I mean, remember the season a couple of years ago, he put up like 50 plus home runs. Like, he led the league in home runs or something like that. I mean, like, it was incredible. And those years, I hate to say it, they've been wasted. Those career years from Salvi, they've been wasted, right? Because the Royals have not been successful. They're 30 games under 500 right now. 30 games under 500. And so as much as I love Salvi, I think that it is the right thing to do to try to get as much value out of him right now as possible to try to stem the tide a little bit. Maybe not this season, but at least in the future, because, we've been talking about this rebuild, the young stars. Their farm system is gone. They've got nothing in the farm system. It's completely depleted. So get some value, get some young players to try to build that back up, because it's not a rebuild right now. They are at rock bottom right now. And so I hate to say it, I think it's the right thing to do to trade him.
Well, I mean, you got to get the appropriate return. And that diminishes the longer you wait, because he is playing pretty well this year.
You're going to get more out of him at 33 than at 35 or 36.
Exactly. The tragedy of this season is that this is even a conversation, right? The tragedy of this season is that hope is seemingly in the short term lost. And because you're right, everybody was called up, and we warned last year, like, guys, like, calling up a AAA roster does not mean wins. And I know we're excited about these players, but I don't know what the short-term solution is, but you're right. In the long term, if you don't see any possibility of winning in the next 3 years, then what good is Salvador Perez doing you other than carrying the banner for your organization and being, an all-timer? And I think it becomes like, okay, let's say they trade him and he goes and he has 3-4 good years with somebody else, maybe he wins a title, and that fan base falls in love with him. He's always going to be a Royal, right? But there is a difference.
For sure.
There's a difference in Lorenzo Cain and George Brett, right? Adored and revered players, but George Brett did it all with Kansas City, and that matters. But, Lorenzo Cain was just honored by the organization this year and came back. So, does Salvador Perez, is he able to still come and be a part of the organization and everything it's all about? I think so too.
Absolutely.
It will impact his legacy.
Look at the response that Mike Moustakas got just recently when he came back and played at Kauffman for the first time with the Rockies. He got a standing ovation. I mean, and this is a guy that didn't spend nearly anywhere close to his entire career with Kansas City. He got a great ovation, so I think that you can still, I don't think it hurts his legacy. I think that it's one of those things where, from an emotional point of view, yeah, you feel bad about it, but from a baseball point of view, and even I would even say the most diehard Royals fans recognize the value you can get out of Salvi to hopefully try to turn this thing around long term. And I hate that, but it's the truth. The other component in this is that, I'm sorry, I hate watching MJ Melendez play right field. Like, he is awful as a right fielder. He looks like a catcher trying to play right field. So you've got, and I know that Salvi, is the DH a lot of times, but you basically have opened up the catcher position full time for MJ Melendez at that point. If you move Salvi, you don't have to worry about Salvi getting any reps at catcher. It doesn't make me excited either, but at least that's another component to it right now.
Here's the example I'll give you of why this is a little bit scary. Adrian Beltre didn't get traded to the Rangers didn't sign with the Rangers till he was 32. Adrian Beltre is going to go into the Hall of Fame as a Ranger, right? He didn't even spend the most years there. I think he spent the most years or tied for in LA. And he was in Seattle for a while too, and then spent a year in Boston. But like, that's the danger here if you're the Royals. What if, with the DH possibilities now, what if Salvador Perez goes and has 6 all-star seasons and wins some titles with the Padres or whoever's trying to trade for him now? That's the danger if you're the Royal. Like, if you're, And there's no danger in that.
Is
Like,
it a
there's not
danger? It's not really a danger. I mean, it's like
it is to the, it's kind of like, we've talked about this in the NFL. Does New England, how much does New England love seeing Tom Brady win a championship in Tampa, right? Like, I don't know. It like the nostalgic component of it, Salvi, and there aren't a lot of players that do this, right? Like, Shohei Ohtani's going to maybe leave the Angels, and it's like, whatever. But if Mike Trout left the Angels, it's different story, right? And so that's what.
But even then, with Mike Trout, you've got this great talent.
I know,
and the
but
franchise can't deliver a championship with him.
Salvi went to 2 championships with the Royals.
Right.
Let's not forget that either, and won one of them. And has been the only relevant thing about the organization for a few years now. I agree. If somebody makes a big offer, you got to take it. And that's, again, the tragedy of this season, because if they were remotely competitive at all, you don't have to do that. But they don't have anything in the pipeline, right? And they don't have the players that have graduated have not fared well. And so you've got this like hope, like, God, I hope Bobby Witt Jr. pans out. Right. And that's it. And look, so, yeah, I get it.
It's a simple value proposition. If you're a Royals fan, would you rather see Salvador Perez in 3 years hit 28 home runs and drive in 85 RBIs, and the Royals continue to be, losing 100 games a year with no farm system? Or would you rather get value out of Salvi right now at the age of 33
it's an easy
and
answer.
Get some impact players to be able to hopefully get this thing turned around?
It's an easy answer. I just don't want it to impact his legacy overall with the Royals.
It
and
won't.
The reality is it will.
He's beloved. He's beloved, and he will continue to be beloved. It doesn't matter if he goes somewhere else.
But it's different if you play your whole career somewhere and you don't. It is. And that's okay. Like, again, the tragedy of this season is this. And he has a no trade clause. But I think when you read that quote again he gave to Ann Rodgers, it's a business. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know tomorrow I'll be here. So basically, I think he would probably be okay with it. And I hope he ends up somewhere good and he has a chance to win World Series. And yeah, if they get a big offer, it's about all they can do. And then it becomes a fire sale, and they have some tradable assets. They do, that they'll be able to retool, but I don't think they have a choice because they've hit rock bottom. This is rock bottom now. It's just, how long does rock bottom last? If you thought the last 2 or 3 years were rock bottom, we were all wrong, because this is rock bottom. I mean, they don't have much hope for the future outside of Bobby Witt Jr. And, there's not much coming up that you're really excited about. So this is it. Like, you
like Vinny Pasquantino, but he's on the injured list now.
Yeah,
like
it's fine.
There are some other assets that I think are okay. Nick Prado, I think, is okay. Drew Waters is okay. Like, there are some other pieces.
Pasquantino and Witt are it for me. Like, that's all you're hanging your hat right now. And
right.
So you got to go trade everything out. You got to try and get some players in. You have to draft well and time free agency right, because again, the A's are historically bad, like one of the worst teams we've ever seen. And the Royals are only a game and a half better than that right now.
Yep. It's one of the great indictments, I think, in Major League Baseball. The fact that the Royals are this bad with absolutely no hope in their farm system at all. Like, what do you even hang your hat on outside of Bobby Witt Jr.? And I worry, and one of the things I'm concerned about is that there's been so much hope placed on the shoulders of Bobby Witt Jr. that he doesn't live up to it. And then that's another disappointment. I don't know. I have no idea. I hope that doesn't happen, but it's not like you've got a bunch of other pieces that you can point to help shoulder that expectation. It's Bobby Witt Jr. or bust right now for the Royals, because there's literally nothing else to hang your hat on.
33 years old. They got, there will be teams that want Salvador Perez. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But here's the other part of this now, as we continue the conversation. Would, love to hear from you, Royals fans, on the IHOP hotline, 869-1240. What if it's not an overwhelming offer, right? Like, what if it's just like a meh offer? Are you better served then at that point just to say no? Like, he's the only thing bringing people to the park. We're not going to take your crappy offer for Salvador Perez and he's going to stay right here. We'll only trade him if it's a good offer. I think I'm okay with that. I don't like there is enough value in there are two players that people are going to show up to see, Salvador Perez and Bobby Witt Jr. And if if you're not given a good offer, because I think there are teams that will sense desperation from Kansas City and be like, yeah, we'll give you this, we'll give you our 18th best prospect. And, that I don't know I think it's got to be a good offer. I don't think you take just anything for Salvador Perez. You would take just anything for Chapman or Barlow or one of these, but you wouldn't do that for Perez, I wouldn't think. And this is a big spot for Piccolo because he's got to make his first real big decision in this role on what the value of Salvador Perez is and if it's worth trading this franchise cornerstone, who again on Mount Rushmore is there with Brett and whoever else you want to put on it, but he's there, right? Most important player that's ever played for this organization outside of George Brett. So there's some pressure there too to make sure it's a good offer and not just any offer.
Right. I also wonder too, at what point in this historically bad season for the Royals is basically everybody on the table outside of maybe Bobby Witt Jr. But at what point do you start entertaining? At what point do you start entertaining other options of like, I guess at this point, let's blow the whole thing up. It's not working. We're 30 games under 500 in early June. At this point, it's not working. It's not going to work. Let's blow the whole thing up and start over.
That point is now. Who are the untradeable pieces for me? It's probably just those two, Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino. I think that might be it. I'm trying to like rack my brain to make sure I'm not missing a pitcher somewhere in there, but I don't think I am. I think I'd trade anybody. But another tragedy of this season is your guys have lost their trade value. Yep. Chapman's always going to have trade value because he throws at 102 miles an hour, and Barlow has been good enough to have value for a contender for sure. I don't know how much value a lot of these guys even have at this point, and so at some point too, while we're on this, I asked this question yesterday, like, does Quatraro get a second year?
I don't think you can blame Quatraro necessarily.
Oh, yes, you can. Yes, you can. Who are you going to blame? Because the same players weren't this bad last year.
Well, I think that
worse. They've gotten markedly worse, like all across the board.
I mean, I think it was pretty clear that he inherited a bad situation from day one,
and
right?
A bad situation has gotten worse.
Yeah, I think you can give him a second year because I do think, in my opinion, I'm not sure that you can place all of this on his shoulders. I think that the roster that he inherited from Dayton Moore, I mean, there's a reason why Dayton Moore is not with the team anymore. Right. I mean, at this point, would you have rather had Mike Matheny for another year? Because I don't think that's the right choice either.
Mike Matheny had this team much better last year than Quatraro does.
Much better? I mean, I think much better is a stretch. I think
on
that
June, what are we? Just June 13th? Let's see if I can pull this up. Let's see. Well, let's compare June 13th of 2022. Surely the internet can find this for me. Where were we here? I don't know what their record was. I don't know that I can pull that up. I
mean, clearly their record was better this time last year than this year, but saying they're much better. I mean, come on, like that.
I got it. They were 20 games under 500 last year instead of 30.
Okay.
That's 10% worse, or is that 20% worse? It's a lot worse. It's a whole lot worse.
Both are still really bad. I agree. I mean, come on.
But you made the change because it was so bad with Matheny, and now all the same players.
But don't you think that's more? Don't you think that's more of a this team was bad last year, and there's no indication that they're going to get better this year? Like, I think Quatraro needs a better roster, right?
But the narrative, Tommy, was that like this new coaching staff is going to come in and get so much more out of these young players. Right. We're going to see these pitch. We finally, we're making a change. Cal Eldred's not there. We're going to make all these changes. And now these players will get coached the right way and they'll be much better. And they're not. They're worse. I don't think you give Quatraro a second year if this goes this badly for the entire season. I don't know how you justify it. Like, and that's not a knock on him necessarily because I don't, I've never talked to him and I don't know. but it isn't like it got worse when it didn't feel like it could.
Well,
How do
if
you
you're gonna-
justify that?
Look, if you're not going to give Quatrero a second year, I don't know how you can give JJ Piccolo a second year at this point. I mean,
Well, because you have to
Well,
evaluate the trade deadline
but
on
keep in mind with Piccolo, it's not like he was brought in from somewhere else and inherited this
Totally.
roster. He was part of the Dayton Moore regime.
Got it.
Like he was in
Absolutely.
it there also with Moore. And so I think that he needs to be held responsible also
evaluation-
for this, right?
His evaluation will come at the trade deadline. And that will be, I think, how you evaluate him. But, and again, I'm not sitting here saying any of this is directly Quatrero's fault, although I think some of it needs to be. I just if you're trying to, if you're willing to trade Salvador Perez, you got to be willing to can the coach, the manager that has this team as bad as it ever has been.
If Quatrero had come in in his very first year and matched what Matheny did, and they were 20 games under 500 and they were still bad at 20 games under 500, you would be okay then with keeping him for another year at 20 games under 500.
Probably.
But somewhere between 20 and 30, that's your cutoff point.
It's not like a number of games. It's the fact that this team is definitively worse than it was a year ago. That's not debatable. It is worse. They have gotten worse, across the board. And if you're willing to trade Salvador Perez, then Quatrero should mean nothing to the organization. And what's the number one danger for Kansas City as an organization? It's that Bobby Witt Jr. doesn't pan out. And Bobby Witt Jr.'s been, he's coming along, right? But if there isn't there should be no loyalty to Quatrero. Who cares?
Look, I'll take it a step further. If you're willing to trade Salvador Perez and you're willing to can Quatrero, at that point, outside of Bobby Witt Jr., everybody else should be able to go.
And Pascantino. And yes, everybody should be available to go. Absolutely. Because what are you hanging your hat on right now? And this all starts again with a Salvador Perez trade possibility. If you're willing to do that, you have to be willing to do anything to get this turned around, because that is the last thing you want to do.
You have to get out of the emotional headspace of the legacy of Salvador Perez and all of that. And I love Salvi. I love his personality and what he's brought to Kansas City, but you have to get out of that and think about the long-term viability of this franchise. And desperate times, unfortunately, call for desperate measures.
I get it. I agree. I think if you get a good offer for him, you got to make it. I just what's on the table here. Let's let Earl get a word in before we take a break on the IHOP hotline, 869-1240. Earl, how's it going, man?
Hey, I've had better days, but I can tell you this, as a Royals fan my whole life, I think old Q there is Urban Meyer's brother. To let that guy fester in Kansas City is abominable. It is so silly. They're not motivated. You watch him at press conferences. This man's been beat already. He is awful. He does not motivate this crew. And everything you're saying is absolutely correct. They are far worse than they were last year. There is no hope. And I'm a guy who believes in Santa Claus, that by golly, what they brought in is abysmal, man. This guy, it just cut the ties, say, whoop, Urban Meyer's brothers, we made a mistake. Let's get him out of Dodge. Let's get some semblance of some hope back in Kansas City, because you know what? It was only 8 years ago, and I sat through 30 years between World Series. So even during those times, and, it can be hard to watch even during the worst of time. This is as bad and as yucky as I've ever seen Royals baseball. And the change they made at manager was wrong. Get him out on a rail, put him on that rail, get him out of Dodge, man. He's awful.
Earl, we appreciate it. Thanks for the call. Yeah, I mean, that's my point. It got worse when it didn't seem like it could. And why would you not make a change now? The team is not responding. If you're willing to trade Salvador Perez, what matters more to the organization? What matters more to the fan base? Salvador Perez or Matt Quatraro? Like, who cares?
I mean, I do. I feel bad for Quatraro a little bit.
I do too.
Because,
I do too. That's not the point. Like, I feel bad
it wasn't
for him
like
too.
it wasn't like there was all of this hope and optimism that they were
Right.
going to be a contender with Quatraro. Now it was like, no, they're bad. Maybe he can get them a little bit less bad, but the roster was
more
stinky
about
from day one.
maybe he can get more out of these young players. That was the point, right? He comes in from Tampa and like they know what they're doing. But man, everybody's
the point was more about
worse.
analytics. The point was more about, let's get
analytics,
a small
analytics
market
hell,
guy who knows
because
analytics into Wichita.
Yeah, who cares, right?
I mean, Kansas
Analytics,
City, yeah.
And analytics have you 10 games worse. So you can take that
Right.
and throw it in the trash. Where's Ned Yost when you need him, right? Like this team needs a little fire in their butt, and they don't have it. And so, like, there's just no point in letting this fester. Like, if you're willing to trade Salvador Perez, you're willing to do anything outside of trading Bobby Witt Jr. or Benny Pascantino, because that just doesn't make any sense. Like, you're willing to do anything else with the roster. And I think that they need to be. And that's where JJ Piccolo now will get evaluated. And he'll probably get evaluated on like, hey, man, I know you brought in Quatraro and everybody was really excited about this.
Right.
You were wrong, I think, because you're way worse. And now I'm not saying they need to make that change in the middle of the season. Let the season play out. But if in the offseason, if they keep at this pace and there's no sign of improvement, why would you even, like, what are you wasting your time for?
Well, and you mentioned wasting your time. Where the hell is John Sherman? Maybe rather than wasting your time on trying to sell a public on a new stadium,
I know.
Let's try to figure out this team that's 30 games under 500 and has zero hope on the field moving forward.
Good luck convincing the tax base that they need to put a stadium downtown right now. 869-1240 is the number to call. We'll come back. More Sports Daily. Appreciate the call there from Earl, 869-1240. We'll be right back. More Sports Daily after this.
Your phone call is welcome. 869-1240. Sports Daily on 97.5 and 1240 KFH. Wichita's #1 sports talk radio.
Brought to you by Forever Long.
The days are heating up, and it's time to get ready for concerts in the park at the Capitol Federal Amphitheater, 1607 East Central in Andover. Free Music Friday every Friday night, starting Friday, June 16th with the Lou Brown Band. Bring your lawn chair, blankets, and some extra cash for the food trucks. Gates open at 6:30. Music starts at 8 p.m. No outside coolers allowed. It's Free Music Fridays with concerts in the park at the Capitol Federal.
All right, welcome back. Sports Daily, right here on KFH. It's Albracht and Castor. Let's continue this conversation because I think it's been an interesting one for folks, and we've got some good commentary on the video streams. Jesse first says, a new stadium on the ballot in April. I think a Perez trade would make that impossible to sell. I think what's even harder than that, Jesse, is the fact that they're so bad. Like you're not going to have a motivated. Imagine this vote coming in 2016, versus now. I think that's the problem in itself. And then Andrew has one that I do want to get into a little bit more. And Andrew says he doesn't think analytics, and we're talking about Cotrero now, has anything to do with this team being 10 games worse. Managing coaching doesn't really sway success that much. That seemed like a lazy generalization or dig out of frustration. So let me address that here. So if this team was 10 games better, we'd be sitting here saying, oh, see, it's Cotrero and his analytics. They're a 500 team like that. That's what it is. That's the difference. So you can't have it both ways, right? If analytics doesn't have that big an impact, analytics doesn't have that big an impact. It doesn't make you markedly better. It doesn't make you markedly worse. So you can't have that both ways. Now, I'm a little bit sensitive to that because I absolutely appreciate the value in analytics. I'm not anti-analytics, but I think it's way overblown. And I think managers like Ned Yost and Ron Washington will always have a place in this game because motivation is such a critical component of any coach, manager, whatever. And if you don't have this team behind you, what's the point? You can put a lot of people in there that understand analytics and can tell you which matchup you should put out there and which pitcher is more favorable based on a computer decides what analytics are. So it does matter. And it does have something to do with being 10 games worse. Now, am I blaming analytics? No, I'm saying this analytics guy that you've brought in is having zero impact on this team, and they're worse than they were before he came in.
But you also need to have the context of where the Royals were a year ago with a manager that historically has had a terrible relationship with his players, right? Like Mike Matheny, that's been in the news for a long time. When he was in St. Louis,
absolutely,
there were players that were rebelling against him because he was just a jerk to them. So I think that you have to have that in context in general, like with the way that the Royals
Matheny should have been gone far before he 100%. Was gone. Don't get me 100. Wrong.
I hated that hire from day one. I thought it was an awful hire for Kansas City when you've got a big crop of young players with a manager who has been, on the record being anti-young players, hazing rookies and things like that. Like that's what Matheny has done his entire career, and they tried to sell it as a kinder, gentler, softer Mike Matheny. Bullcrap. So I think that if you don't know what's going on inside that locker room, inside that clubhouse right now with Cotrero, and you don't know how the players have responded to Cotrero and his leadership, right? So I think that if you are to blame, and I'm not saying you're doing this, but if you're to blame analytics as making this team 10 games worse, I'm not sure that that's a fair
I'm not
assessment.
blaming analytics at all. I don't care about it. My point is I don't care about the analytics right now. The analytics don't even matter. The fact is this team is worse than it was last year. And you made this, you made this change because you're saying that's not good enough. Listen, if there was anybody that thought the Royals would be this bad, speak up, because I didn't, right? I thought they would be bad, but not like this. And so when this kind of bad happens, it has to be unacceptable. The players have to see that it's unacceptable. Everybody in the organization needs to know that it's unacceptable. Now, this season isn't over, and I'm not saying they need to fire Cotrero today. They don't. Unless they're saying, and I hope that disclaimer rang through for everybody, too, in the last segment. I've never talked to Cotrero. I don't know anything about that. Like, I had a feel for how that team responded to Ned Yost, right? Because I was there. I was in the middle of it. I'm not that right now. So I can't speak to that. But it cannot be acceptable. If you are willing to trade the second most important player that has ever put on a Royals hat in Salvador Perez, you have got to be willing to do anything. And if Salvador Perez can be a casualty of this, then who cares about Cotrero?
Right. But, and I think that it's okay. Like, I understand Cotrero being a casualty in all of this. I get it. he didn't build it. He didn't make it this way.
Yep.
He's not to blame for the reason that this roster is the way that it is. But if he's got to be a casualty of it, I get it. I understand it. The front office and the ownership, they've got to fall on the sword for this, because this master rebuild plan that we've been hearing about for I don't know how many years hasn't worked. And there's no indication it's going to work. So I think that long term, like those guys, and Dayton Moore already has fallen on his sword, but JJ Piccolo, I think he's probably got to be next. If you're talking about trading Salvador Perez, and if you're talking about Matt Quatrero being a casualty, there is no reason why JJ Piccolo shouldn't be a casualty either.
Because his job now will be determined by this trade deadline, right? Like that's what his job's going to be determined on. He's, I think different roles have different responsibilities. And if we all definitively sit here and are like, dang, they got a lot out of that trade deadline. They did a lot. Then I think that's different than the on-field manager winning games.
But right now, knowing where JJ Piccolo has been throughout the last several years, and now is the general manager, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much faith do you have in him?
Like 2. But I got to see this trade deadline first and see what he's able to work, right?
So let's say that he has a good trade deadline and your faith goes from a 2 to a 4. Is that still acceptable for him to be the general manager of this team? Is he the guy that you feel comfortable in trying to rebuild this team again and lead them back to contention again? Because he was part of the regime that did it last time, and it didn't work. It was
a curious hire to begin with, and I just can't answer that now. Here's an example I'll give you, though. So, and again, I don't mean to do this because it's the Rangers, but it's recent, and it's very similar. So John Daniels was the GM there of their glory years, right? And he was basically demoted or let go. I don't even remember now. It's very similar to Dayton Moore's situation, right? And they promoted from within. Chris Young, by the way, former Royals pitcher, and he's done a fantastic job now at one trade deadline and in one free agency. So, and that was despite them not being very good last year. So I think you're talking about two different things here. And they went out and they brought in Bruce Bochy after their young analytics guru didn't work out. Now, they gave him 3 years, I think, but it wasn't getting any better. They brought in Bruce Bochy, and boom, all of a sudden, it's like, oh, here's this old timer. And Bruce Bochy's very analytically savvy. He's not Ned Yost, but he's also old school baseball. And here's the other thing I'll say about analytics, and I don't know the answer to this because I think we haven't had enough time. Rule changes are going to change what's valued, right? Like, stolen bases are going to be valued now more than they were before. And, average is going to be valued now more than it was before. Like, the analytics are going to have to adapt back to these rule changes. And I'm not smart enough to know how that will happen or to what degree things matter as much or less than they used to. I don't know that yet. So that's a part of it too. But the point on Quatrero is, I'm not saying this is Quatrero's fault. I'm saying what was bad got worse. And they are getting less out of really critical players to this organization. And that is the great danger. The great danger is that you get into a position that you even have to think about trading Salvador Perez. So what is Matt Quatrero? Matt Quatrero means nothing right now. If they're not responding and they're worse than they were in a bad year, like that's a simple casualty, right? Like, hey man, not putting the blame on you here, but that got out of hand real quick. We got to make a change. Like, this didn't work. Sorry about it. Hope you succeed somewhere else. And you have to try something else. The general manager spot, we'll see. Piccolo has got his chance right now. He didn't have a good offseason. I'll say that. So that's not working in his favor. He didn't do anything in the offseason to make the team better. So, can you get a lot out of Aroldis Chapman? That'll make that a better offseason move if he brings a big return at the deadline. If they go and add a bunch of, top prospects and you can go to evaluators and say, and they all say, yeah, the Royals went from one of the worst farm systems to pretty good in one season. I think that's how you evaluate Piccolo. Yeah. And if he's willing to make the tough decision to trade Salvador Perez, is he willing to make the decision to say, this is unacceptable, we got to make a change in the clubhouse? I think those things help evaluate him. Quatrero, it's all on the field. It's all wins and losses.
I mean, let's talk about the moves that JJ Piccolo made in the offseason. Franmil Reyes
hired Quatrero, by the way.
Franmil Reyes, no longer with the organization. Jackie Bradley Jr. just got designated for assignment. Jordan Lyles hasn't won a start for the Kansas City Royals. I mean, outside of Aroldis Chapman, there wasn't any other kind of acquisition that JJ Picollo made. So I'm not willing at this point. I know you keep saying he's going to be evaluated by the trade deadline. I'm already evaluating him. I've evaluated him from day one. And I'm not sure that even the most successful trade deadline would make me gain a ton of confidence in this guy's ability to be the one to turn this around for the Royals.
I don't disagree. He hired a manager that's not working, right? And he'd had an abysmal offseason that's totally unacceptable. And the pitchers are getting worse. You got everyone thought Cal Eldridge leads and all these pitchers are going to be better. Yep. They're not. So I'm with you on that. I think that's totally on the table. I don't have I don't think the urgency of it is as high on June 13th as it will be on August 13th, but I'm with you. I think you can absolutely make that change. And there's some responsibility as we talk about trickling up to John Sherman to say, again, across the organization,
100%.
Because John Sherman, by the way, inherited what we currently see too. Like he took over when these were all the players that were going to be the next big thing. So it's not like, that's all.
But think about when Sherman took over and, he comes from the Indians or now the Guardians organization, and they were willing to spend money and they were bringing in free agents and all of that. And there was this initial hope that, hey, John Sherman's going to come in and, we're going to actually get to see some, decent players coming into this organization. Hasn't happened. And,
nope.
The guy has been, in my opinion, MIA from what's actually going on this season to go and try to sell this brand new stadium. It's like, can we focus in on what's happening on the field? They're 30 games under 500 on June 13th.
It's all very unfortunate timing for Sherman, but yes, he does need to more vocally and publicly be disgusted by this because that's what the fans want right now, right? It's not that simple. We're not naive. I get it. There's nothing simple about this, but public perception matters, especially when you're trying to sell a new stadium. Public perception matters. And you've got to be like, what do you think Jerry Jones would be doing right now?
Yeah. Exactly.
Not that he's like this shining model of ownership, but generally, think about what do you think George Steinbrenner would have been doing right now? What do you think the new Mets owner would be doing? No, you got to get out there and say, wow, this is bad. But the problem is he hasn't been willing to go pony up for any good players. And so that's where he doesn't really have a leg to stand on there. Like you can't, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? You are not going to have people excited about a new stadium if you're this bad. There's no debate about that. So
the only reason, last night at Kauffman was Chiefs night. The only reason people showed up was to see Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce and Andy Reid.
By the way,
that's the only reason why.
Patrick Mahomes is a part owner of the Royals here.
Yep.
Maybe we ought to hold Patrick Mahomes accountable for this failure. I'm kidding, Chiefs fans. Don't bring your pitchforks at me. That was a joke. But yeah, this has to get better. And to put a bow and circle it all back, if Salvador Perez is on the table, everybody's on the table. Outside of Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino, because again, that doesn't make any sense. But organizationally, if Salvador Perez is on the table, there is no more important member of the Royals organization, period, than Salvador Perez. So if he's on the table, everyone's on the table. 869-1240, the IHOP hotline. It's Albracht and Castor. We've almost spent an hour on the Royals. Didn't see that coming. We'll be right back.
Call in and give us your thoughts.
It's absolutely crazy.
316-869-1240. This is your home for sports. 97.5 and 1240 KFH.
The commercials are over.
Yo, I haven't got all day.
869-1240.
Time to get busy.
This is Sports Daily on KFH.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks, everybody, for the Royals chatter on our video streams and on the IHOP hotline at 869-1240. The Nuggets are NBA champions. Christian Braun is an NBA champion. 7 points, played 24 minutes for the Nuggets last night. Critical minutes, key component to the championship, key component to that series. We'll see what he's able to do. Doesn't get much better than a natty in college, followed by a natty in the NBA. In your first year, and sort of becoming this character that people are paying attention to now in the NBA. And Tommy, as we come back to that, like, I wonder how good Braun, like what is Braun's NBA ceiling? I wonder about that, because his energy is contagious. I think he can be a defender at that level. I don't think he'll ever be like a high octane, high level scorer in the NBA. But I do think he's a guy that can get that, second contract and become a key cog for somebody. And I think you do need to, cook in some room for improvement, because that's all he's ever done, right? He always gets better. But I think he's got a chance to have a long NBA career and get that second contract and get a big payday.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the college championship and the NBA championship, also 3 state titles in high school. So the guy's a champion, by every term of the definition there. I think that it was kind of interesting. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a Nuggets fan, and I said, hey, when you look at Christian Braun long term, like after this season, is he a guy that you could see starting on this team? Or do you feel like he's got that the energy factor to be the spark plug off the bench, and that's where he's best suited? And my friend was like, I think he could be a starter on this team, and I don't know if that's going to be the path for him, or if Michael Malone sees him more valuable as a guy coming off the bench and giving them a spark of energy. But regardless of that, I think he's got a role, moving forward. There were a couple of games early in the playoffs he didn't play at all. You really saw the Nuggets lean on him more as the NBA Finals went on in the biggest spot, and he delivered.
Yep, I agree. And I think that, again, I think he can get better. And, they took him probably earlier than people thought. So they obviously liked him. And I'm not trying to say, as we talk about Fred VanVleet maybe getting a max contract now, but Braun could have a similar path where he sort of grows into this role. And I think if you're Denver and you're thinking about the longevity of this, and I don't know if they'll have cap casualties or anything like that, I think he becomes a cog that you can count on, at least right now, if nothing else, because he's affordable. It reminds me as we try and compare it to local players, Landry Shamet, right? Like the early impact he had, and then he became an insanely desirable player for a lot of different teams now. So interesting to watch Braun, the Kansas native. Yeah, state championships, good point, to college championship, to NBA championship. What's next? An MVP in year 2? I mean, I don't know. For Christian Braun, I don't know how you keep it up, but he certainly has. Congratulations to him, and always cool for the state of Kansas. All right, 869-1240. IHOP hotline. Put it on speed dial. We'll get you in tomorrow if you didn't get in today. Thanks to everybody for watching us on Facebook, on YouTube, on Twitter, on our video stream. Always a lot of fun. We'll come back. We'll wrap it up. We'll tell you what's on tap today here, Sports Daily.